This is HOA debrief. The mailbox cluster turned into a winter courtroom. Your sidewalk is an ice rink and I am filing the hazard report right now. Pamela King stood at the end of my driveway with a clipboard and a stack of winter hearing notices delivered during snow days, her breath misting in the freezing air. She wore a blue puffer coat with the hood up, her black shoulder-length hair whipping around her face as she jabbed a gloved finger toward the patch of ice near my front steps. I kept my hands in the pockets of my red puffer jacket, my white knit beanie pulled low, and checked my watch because I had exactly 40 minutes before my next shift started at the EMT dispatch center and I could not afford to be late. Denton, Texas was buried under 6 inches of ice and slush, the kind of freak storm that shuts down highways and knocks out power for days, and the Northgate Landing Association had decided this was the perfect time to enforce rules that did not exist. I had shoveled the sidewalk twice already that morning. The problem was not that I had skipped the work. The problem was that Denton had hit 22 degrees overnight, and every surface had frozen into a skating rink no matter how much salt I threw down. Pamela did not care. She tapped her pen against the clipboard and said, "I am writing you up for failure to maintain a passable pedestrian route. That is a $200 fine plus a $75 reinspection fee, and if you do not fix it by tomorrow morning, I can fine you daily until the snow melts and you cry." I pulled my hands out of my pockets and gestured at the ice. I shoveled twice. The temperature dropped and it refroze. There is nothing else I can do until the sun comes out or the city plows the main road so I can get more salt. Pamela shook her head like I had just confessed to a felony. That is not my problem. The covenants say residents are responsible for safe access at all times. You signed the agreement when you bought the property. I bought this place 3 years ago because I needed something stable for my custody schedule with my daughter. Every other weekend and Wednesday nights, and the HOA had made a hobby out of targeting those exact days, with surprise inspections, gate access glitches, and parking map changes that left my ex fuming in the guest lot. I knew Pamela was the election committee chair, which meant she controlled the ballots and proxies, and she had spent the last year manipulating votes to keep her allies in power. But standing here in the freezing wind with ice under my boots and a tow threat hanging over my head, none of that mattered. What mattered was the doormat on my front porch, which had a thin layer of snow on it, and Pamela was now staring at it like it was a war crime. That mat is a slip hazard. Someone could fall and sue the association. I am adding that to the violation. I took a breath and checked my watch again. I had 35 minutes. Pamela, the mat is on my porch. It is not on the sidewalk. It is not in the common area. She clicked her pen. It is visible from the street. It reflects poorly on the neighborhood. I am calling management and I am going to be dramatic about it. That was her catchphrase. She said it at every board meeting, every hearing, every parking lot ambush. It was her way of announcing that she was about to make your life hell and there was nothing you could do to stop her. I had heard her say it to a contractor who parked in the wrong spot for 10 minutes. I had heard her say it to a neighbor who put up a wreath 2 days before the holiday decoration window opened. Now she was saying it to me over a doormat with snow on it, and I realized she was not here because of the ice or the mat. She was here because I had filed a formal complaint with the management company 2 weeks ago about the parking map manipulation, and this was her retaliation. I walked away on purpose because I wanted her to follow and say more. I headed toward the side of my house where I kept the snow shovel and a bag of rock salt, my boots crunching through the frozen crust. Pamela followed, her voice rising over the wind. "Do not walk away from me. I am not done. You think you can ignore me and nothing will happen? I have the authority to escalate this to a hearing, and when that happens you will be paying legal fees on top of the fines." I stopped and turned. She was 5 feet behind me, clutching the clipboard like a shield, her breath coming fast. I kept my voice calm. "What do you want me to do, Pamela? The ice is ice. The mat is a mat. You are inventing violations because I complained about the parking changes." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that meant she had already won. I do not invent anything. I enforce the rules. And if you have a problem with that, you can take it up at the next hearing, which, by the way, is scheduled for next Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I know you work nights. I know you cannot make it. That is not my problem either. I checked my watch one more time. 30 minutes. I had to leave in 10 to make it to the dispatch center on time. And if I missed the start of my shift, I would get written up. The courthouse had shortened winter hours because of the storm, and I needed to file a formal response to the violation before they closed at 4. Pamela knew all of this because she had access to the resident database, which included emergency contact info and work schedules. She had timed this ambush perfectly. I will see you at the hearing, I said, and I walked past her toward my truck. She called after me. You will see the tow truck first if you do not move that vehicle by tonight. Your assigned spot has been reassigned pending the compliance review. Check your email. I did not check my email until I got to work, but when I did, there it was. A notice from the Northgate Landing Association management portal, dated that morning at 6:15, informing me that my parking spot had been temporarily reassigned due to a snow removal equipment staging area, and that I needed to move my truck to the overflow lot by midnight or face towing and impound FEs. The email included a parking map with my old spot highlighted in red, and a note that said failure to comply would result in a lien filing. There was no board vote. There was no resident notice. Just Pamela, a fabricated emergency, and a tow threat designed to back me into a corner. I pulled up the covenants on my phone during my break and found the section on parking. It said assigned spots could only be reassigned by a majority board vote with 30 days written notice to affected residents. Pamela had done neither. She had just logged into the portal, changed the map, and hit send. That was the pattern I had been tracking for months. Selective enforcement, backdated notices, mystery line items on the ledger that no one could explain. I had started collecting screenshots and saving emails, but I did not have enough to prove intent. Not yet. My ally in all of this was a contractor named Marcus who had been doing gutter work in the neighborhood for the past year. He had photos and timestamps from the day Pamela had interfered with his crew, yelling at them for parking in a visitor spot even though they had a valid work order and a signed entry pass. Marcus had called his supervisor on speaker, and the whole confrontation had been recorded. He had sent me the audio file and a signed statement 2 days ago, and I had been waiting for the right moment to use it. That moment was coming. The next morning I woke up to find my snow stakes knocked over and half buried in a fresh drift. Snow stakes are those little reflective markers you put along the edge of your driveway so the plow does not scrape your curb. Mine had been staked firmly the night before, and now they were scattered across the lawn like someone had kicked them. I walked outside in my red puffer jacket with the hood up, my breath fogging in the air, and found boot prints in the snow that were not mine. They led from the sidewalk to the stakes and then back toward the street. I took photos with my phone, time-stamped and geotagged, and then I checked the doorbell camera footage. The camera had caught a figure in a dark coat at 3 in the morning walking up to the stakes and kicking them over. The footage was grainy because of the snow and the low light, but the crossbody bag was unmistakable. Pamela had done it herself. And then she had filed a new violation that morning claiming I was responsible for snow obstruction in the common area because the knocked-over stakes had created a tripping hazard. The email arrived at 7:30 with a photo attached, showing the stakes lying in the snow and a note that said this was evidence of negligence and disregard for community safety standards. She was building a case, stacking violations one on top of another, and she thought I was too busy with work and custody to fight back. She was wrong. I forwarded the doorbell footage to Marcus and asked if he could get it cleaned up and timestamped properly. He said he knew a guy who did forensic video work for insurance claims, and that the footage would hold up in any hearing or legal proceeding as long as I had the original file. I saved 3 backup copies and uploaded one to a cloud service with a timestamp lock. Then I called the management company and asked to speak to the compliance officer. I got voicemail. I left a message explaining the situation and attaching the footage link. No response. That afternoon, I got a notice that a tow truck had been dispatched to my address and that my vehicle would be impounded at 6 if I did not move it immediately. The notice came from a tow company I had never heard of, and the authorization signature was Pamela King, election committee chair. Not the board president, not the management company, just Pamela, acting on her own authority, using HOA letterhead to make it look official. I called the tow company and explained that the parking reassignment was not valid and that I had proof. The dispatcher said he would pass it along to the driver, but that the driver had already been paid and was on his way. I walked outside at 5:45 and saw the tow truck idling at the end of the block, its yellow lights flashing against the snow. The driver was a big guy in a thick coat, standing next to the cab with a clipboard of his own. I walked over with my phone in one hand and a folder of printed documents in the other. The driver looked up as I approached and said, "You the resident?" "I am. And that truck is not getting towed." He glanced at his clipboard. "I got an authorization from the HOA. Says your spot was reassigned and you did not move." I handed him the folder. "That authorization is fake. The HOA did not vote on the reassignment. This is selective enforcement and harassment, and if you hook that truck, you are going to be named in the lawsuit." The driver opened the folder and flipped through the pages. I had printed the covenant section, the fake parking map email, the doorbell footage stills, and a signed statement from Marcus with the vendor intimidation recording attached. The driver read for maybe 30 seconds, then looked up at me. "This is a mess." "It is. And it is going to get messier if you hook that truck. I am telling you right now, the authorization is not valid. You can call the management company and verify." He pulled out his phone and made a call. I could not hear the other end, but I heard him say, "Yeah, I am at the address. The resident is saying the authorization is fake, and he has documentation." He waited, then said, "Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay." He hung up and looked at me. They said to hold off until they can confirm. I am leaving. The tow truck pulled away, its lights fading into the snow. I stood there for a minute, watching the red taillights disappear, and then I walked back inside. That was the first time I had used the trump card, and it had worked. But Pamela was not done. 2 days later, the gate access system glitched. I pulled up to the main entrance at 8:30 in the morning with my daughter in the back seat, and the gate did not open. I scanned my fob 3 times. Nothing. I called the management company and got a recording saying the office was closed due to weather. I called the emergency maintenance line and got voicemail. I was stuck at the gate with my daughter asking why we could not get in, and I knew exactly who was behind it. The gate system was controlled by the same portal Pamela had used to fake the parking map, and all she had to do was flag my fob as inactive and I was locked out. I reversed out of the gate lane and drove to the pedestrian entrance on the north side. There was a keypad there that used a backup code, and I had written it down months ago in case something like this happened. The code worked. I walked my daughter to my front door, got her settled with breakfast, and then I called the board president and left a message. I explained the gate glitch, the tow attempt, the fake parking map, the tampered snow stakes, and the vendor intimidation recording. I said I had documentation for all of it and that I was filing a formal complaint with the state HOA regulatory board if this did not stop. No response. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday at 9. I had already filed a motion to reschedule because of my work shift, but Pamela denied it. She said the hearing rules required residents to adjust their schedules to accommodate association business, not the other way around. That was not in the covenants. I checked, but she was counting on me not showing up so she could issue a default judgment and move forward with the lien. I called my supervisor and swapped shifts with a coworker so I could be at the hearing. My supervisor was not happy, but he understood. I had never missed a shift, and I was not about to let Pamela railroad me because of a calendar trick. The hearing was held in the clubhouse, which was a drafty room with folding tables and metal chairs. Pamela sat at the head table with two other board members, a man in his 60s who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, and a woman in her 40s who nodded at everything Pamela said. There were maybe a dozen residents in the audience, most of them looking cold and annoyed. I sat in the front row with my folder of documents and my phone recording audio. Pamela opened the hearing by reading the list of violations. Failure to maintain a safe pedestrian route. Slip hazard on personal property visible from the street. Obstruction in the common area due to snow stakes. Unauthorized parking in a reassigned spot. She made it sound like I had turned my house into a danger zone. I raised my hand and stood up. Can I respond? Pamela looked annoyed. You will have your turn after I finish presenting the evidence. She pulled out a stack of photos showing the icy sidewalk, the doormat, the knocked-over stakes, and my truck in the parking spot. She said each photo was taken during an official inspection and that I had been given multiple warnings. She did not mention that she had taken the photos herself at odd hours, that the doormat was on my private porch, or that the snow stakes had been tampered with. She just laid it out like a prosecutor building a case, and the two board members nodded along. When she finished, I stood up again. I have evidence that contradicts everything you just said. Can I present it now? Pamela hesitated, then nodded. Make it quick. I walked up to the table and handed each board member a copy of the covenant section on parking. I pointed to the part that said spots could only be reassigned by a majority vote with 30 days' notice. I showed them the email Pamela had sent, time-stamped at 6:15 the morning of the fake reassignment. I explained that there had been no vote, no notice, and no legitimate reason to reassign my spot. The older board member frowned and looked at Pamela. Did we vote on this? Pamela said, it was an emergency snow removal situation. I had the authority to act. I shook my head. The covenants do not give you that authority, and there was no snow removal equipment staged in that spot. I have photos showing it was empty the entire day. I pulled up the photos on my phone and passed it down the table. The board members leaned in and looked. The woman in her 40s said, "This does not look like an emergency." I moved on to the snow stakes. I showed them the doorbell footage stills of the figure in the dark coat kicking the stakes over at 3 in the morning. I explained that the footage was time-stamped and that I had 3 backup copies. I said Pamela had filed a violation blaming me for obstruction when she was the one who caused it. The older board member looked uncomfortable. Pamela said that footage does not prove anything. It could be anyone. I said, it is someone wearing a crossbody bag just like yours. And the boot prints match the size and tread of your boots, which are visible in the photos you submitted. The room went quiet. Pamela looked at the other board members, then back at me. This is harassment. You are trying to deflect from your own violations by making wild accusations. I kept my voice calm. I am not accusing anyone. I am presenting evidence. If you think the footage is wrong, we can bring in an expert to verify it. But I am not the one who created this situation. You did. The woman board member said, I think we need to table this until we can review everything. This is more complicated than I thought. Pamela slammed her hand on the table. We are not tabling anything. This resident has violated multiple rules and he is wasting our time with conspiracy theories. I move that we uphold all violations and proceed with the lien filing. The older board member said, I am not comfortable with that. There are too many inconsistencies. I vote to dismiss the violations pending further review. The woman board member nodded. I agree. Dismissed. Pamela looked like she had been slapped. She started to argue, but the older board member cut her off. The vote is 2-1. The violations are dismissed. This hearing is over. I walked out of the clubhouse with my folder under my arm and my phone buzzing with a text from Marcus. He said he had cleaned up the doorbell footage and sent it to a lawyer friend who specialized in HOA disputes. The lawyer wanted to talk. I called him that afternoon and explained the whole situation. He said I had a solid case for harassment, selective enforcement, and possible fraud if the financial records showed a pattern of missing funds tied to fake violations. He said he could file a formal complaint with the state and request a management audit that would expose the pattern. I told him to do it. The audit request went through 2 weeks later. The management company tried to block it, but the state regulatory board overruled them and ordered a full financial review going back 3 years. The auditor found exactly what I suspected. Mystery line items, backdated invoices, fake vendor charges, and a pattern of fines targeting the same 6 residents over and over. The total came to almost $30,000 in bogus fees, and Pamela King's name was on most of the authorization forms. The auditor flagged it as possible embezzlement and referred it to the district attorney. The HOA called an emergency meeting to address the findings. The clubhouse was packed. Residents who had been fined unfairly showed up with their own documentation, and the board could not ignore it anymore. The insurance carrier sent a representative who stood at the front of the room and said the association was at risk of losing coverage if the financial issues were not resolved immediately. The carrier issued a non-renewal warning and demanded reforms within 30 days, including new hearing rules so residents could not be railroaded, independent oversight of the election process, and the removal of any board member found to have violated fiduciary duties. The board caved. They had no choice. The whole neighborhood could lose coverage if they did not act. Pamela tried to spin it. She stood up and said the audit had been based on incomplete information and that she had always acted in good faith. She said the financial discrepancies were accounting errors and that the association should not rush to judgment. One of the residents in the back shouted, "You fined me $800 for a mailbox dent that did not exist." Another resident held up a packet of fake hearing notices and said, "You scheduled my hearing on a day I was out of state and you knew it." Pamela started to respond, but the older board member cut her off. He said the board had voted before the meeting to ask Pamela to step down from all leadership roles, effective immediately, and that she would not be eligible to run in the next election. Pamela looked around the room like she was waiting for someone to defend her. No one did. She grabbed her crossbody bag, stuffed with paper packets, and walked out. She could not spin it. The board implemented the new hearing rules the following week. Residents could now request rescheduling for work conflicts. All violations had to be verified by an independent third party before fines were issued. And the election process was moved to a neutral vote counting service with audit trails. The HOA changed hearing rules so residents could not be railroaded, and the neighborhood finally had a system that worked. The funny part came a month later when Pamela tried to file a complaint against me for defamation. She claimed I had slandered her at the emergency meeting and that my accusations had damaged her reputation. The lawyer Marcus had connected me with sent her a response letter outlining every piece of evidence we had, including the doorbell footage, the financial audit, the fake parking map, the vendor intimidation recording, and the signed statements from 6 residents who had been targeted the same way I was. He said if she proceeded with the complaint, we would countersue for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and we would seek damages that included legal fees and compensation for lost time. Pamela dropped the complaint 2 days later. The neighbor who had watched the whole thing unfold from his driveway, the one who had pretended to be neutral the whole time, knocked on my door and said, "I should have backed you up sooner. I am sorry." I told him it was fine. He had been scared of retaliation, and I understood that. But when he showed up at the next board meeting and nominated himself for election committee chair, I knew things had really changed. Karen tried to shame me, and the neighbor fact-checked her instantly at the meeting, reminding everyone that Pamela had been removed for cause and that her complaints had no merit. I kept the doorbell footage and the audit report in a locked file, just in case. My daughter asked me once why I spent so much time dealing with the HOA, and I told her it was because some fights are worth having. She nodded like she understood, even though she was only 8. The custody schedule ran smooth after that. No more gate glitches. No more surprise inspections. No more fake violations timed to disrupt my week. The new board even issued refunds to the 6 residents who had been targeted, including me, and the total came to almost $2,000 each. It was not about the money, it was about the principle. And the principle was simple. You do not get to weaponize the rules just because you have a clipboard and a bad attitude. If you want to hear more HO drama and neighborhood nightmares, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. The snow melted by mid-February, and the neighborhood looked normal again. But everyone remembered what had happened. Every time someone got a notice, they checked it against the covenants. Every time the board called a meeting, the room was full. The Northgate Landing Association was not perfect, but it was better. And that was enough. I will catch you in the next upload.